The bells of St. Augustine's Cathedral tolled with a weight that seemed to press against my chest. Shadows stretched across the marble floor as the organ filled the air with solemn chords. I sat in the front pew, my hands folded tightly over the black gloves in my lap, trying to keep my composure while the world said goodbye to Edmund Vale, my husband of nearly 50 years. When the service ended, murmurs quieted as the executor stepped up to the lectern. His voice was steady, rehearsed, but each word cut deeper than the last. He read aloud the terms of Edmund's estate, the final message my husband had supposedly left for us. To my daughter, Lysandra Vale. I leave the full balance of my financial accounts and all investment portfolios. The words rippled through the pews, a hush falling as heads turned. He continued, to my beloved wife, Honora Vale, I leave a plane ticket to Florida, so she may find rest in warmer air. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. My breath caught, and the cathedral seemed to tilt. Then I saw it, an envelope being handed to me, thin and weightless. A single slip of paper slid into my palm, a one-way ticket. Gasps rose from those gathered. Some covered their mouths, others leaned toward one another in disbelief. Lysandra moved quickly, sweeping me into a hug as if to shield me from the whispers. Her perfume was sharp, her embrace stiff. Against my ear, she breathed 6 words with a smile I felt rather than saw. Mom. Dad wanted you to rest. I kept still, my eyes fixed on the executor as he tucked away the folder of documents. On the front page, the signature leapt out at me. Edmund's hand, normally precise, practiced, was jagged, unsteady, as though drawn by someone drugged or pressed for time. The date matched the week he had been in the hospital, heavily sedated and barely able to hold a spoon. I folded the ticket back into the envelope, slid it beneath my gloves, and sat in silence until the service ended. When the last hymn faded and the guests began filing out, I rose slowly, my mind already turning. By the time I stepped outside into the biting New York air, I knew this story was only beginning, and the truth would not stay buried with Edmund. The morning after the funeral, I drove back to the house Edmund and I had built together brick by brick. The front gate, usually responsive to the old code I had tapped 1,000 times, blinked red and refused to open. I tried again. Nothing. A prickling unease rose in my chest. I parked on the curb and walked up to the door. The brass key I had carried for decades slid into the lock but turned uselessly, as if the tumblers had been rearranged overnight. Through the bay window, I saw movement strangers in matching shirts lifting boxes, wrapping paintings, carrying my life away. Before I could pound on the glass, Cormac opened the door with a smile too polished to be sincere. Honora, don't be alarmed. We had the locks changed. New alarm codes, too. It's just for security. With everything in transition, his tone was meant to soothe, but it grated like sandpaper. Behind him, one of the movers hoisted Edmund's leather armchair, the one where he had spent hours reading. That's marked as a donation, the man said, not meeting my eyes. Donation? My voice cracked, thin with disbelief. Those are my things. Cormac's smile tightened. We thought it best to simplify. Fresh start. Less clutter. I stood rooted, anger and sorrow twisting inside me. Then, from the staircase, a familiar figure hesitated. My grandson, Theo. Shoulders hunched as though carrying a weight heavier than the backpack slung over him. He glanced toward his parents' room, then slipped something small into my hand as he passed me on the porch. His whisper was almost lost in the shuffle of boxes. Grandma, keep this. Don't tell them. I looked down. A flash drive, black and unmarked except for white ink on the side. Ledger 1978-2024. Theo's eyes met mine briefly, filled with a mixture of fear and loyalty. Before he disappeared back inside, I closed my fingers around the drive, feeling the pulse of secrets it carried, and walked away, knowing I had just been handed Edmund's final message. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the house too quiet without Edmund's slow shuffle and the familiar creak of his chair. The flash drive Theo had slipped me felt heavier than metal should. With a deep breath, I slid it into my laptop and waited. Folders bloomed across the screen, decades of meticulously kept ledgers, spreadsheets of deposits and withdrawals, lists of donations to museums, churches, even small scholarships Edmund had funded without ever telling me. Each entry carried his steady hand in scanned notes, proof of a life both disciplined and generous. Among the files were several wills, each carefully dated. The most recent one before his decline named me as trustee, with clear provisions for Theo's education and charitable trusts. But then, at the end of the directory, a single PDF gleamed, "Last Will, Final." My stomach tightened as I opened it. The document bore Edmund's signature, shaky and uneven, dated on the exact day he had been confined to a hospital bed, his body dulled by morphine. I remembered feeding him broth with a spoon, his eyes too heavy to hold open for more than moments. He couldn't have signed anything in that state. At the bottom of the folder was a single scanned note, a line in Edmund's own handwriting: "If things go wrong. Trust, Clause 13. I read it again and again, the words echoing like a whisper from beyond the grave. Clause 13. What had he hidden there? I reached for the phone and dialed the only person I trusted, outside family Naomi Calder, an estate attorney I had met years ago at a community lecture. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm but firm. After I explained what I'd found, she said, "Honora, signatures can be forged. Paper trails cannot. If he kept this detailed a record, there's a way to expose the truth." Her certainty steadied me. As I shut the laptop, I felt Edmund's presence close, as if guiding my hand. The battle for his legacy had only just begun, and I would not face it alone. The next morning, I walked across the street to Jules Ortega's porch. Jules had been my neighbor for nearly 20 years, a widower with a sharp mind and a gentleness that came from years of untangling other people's mistakes at the bank. When I showed him the documents from the drive and told him about the funeral, his brow furrowed in quiet concentration. "Let me see the transfers Lysandra's been bragging about," he said. Adjusting his glasses, I handed over the printouts she had flaunted in front of relatives as proof she now controlled Edmund's fortune. Jules ran his finger down the page, pausing at a line of numbers most people would skim past. "Here," he murmured. "The beneficiary ID doesn't match Edmund's current passport. They used an older one that expired 5 years ago. That's a red flag in any system. Either the bank was misled, or someone inside pushed it through without a full check." The words sent a chill down my spine, proof that what had been presented as legitimate was already riddled with deception. Later that day, Naomi filed an emergency petition to freeze distributions. We sat together in her office, hope flickering that the law might stop this before the money disappeared entirely. But Lysandra and Cormac arrived with smug faces and a printed wire receipt. "The funds are already moved," Cormac announced, as though reading a victory speech. "They're untouchable now." Naomi's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "Receipts prove nothing if fraud touched the process," she said. I clutched the envelope with Edmund's ticket inside, remembering his unsteady signature and his warning to trust Clause 13. And I knew the fight was far from over. We gathered in Naomi's conference room, the air so tight with tension, it was hard to breathe. Lysandra sat across from me, draped in designer black as if still mourning. Though her smile was pure triumph, Cormac leaned back in his chair with his hands folded over his stomach, confidence radiating like heat. Naomi kept her papers in neat stacks, every detail prepared, while Jules tapped his pen softly against a legal pad, his mind already working 2 steps ahead. Naomi began by reviewing the petition, citing the discrepancies in the documents and the suspicious timing of Edmund's final will. Cormac interrupted with the same line he'd rehearsed at the courthouse. "The funds are already transferred. Nothing you do can touch them." That was when Jules leaned forward, his voice calm but edged with quiet authority. "Let's confirm that," he said. Pulling out his phone, he placed it on speaker and dialed a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice answered after 2 rings. "Fraud Division. Peterson. Clara, it's Jules Ortega," he said, his tone shifting into that of a mentor checking on a former student. "I trained you 15 years ago. I need a verification on a wire flagged under suspicious ID." There was a pause. Then the sound of typing. "Account ending 4173, she asked. "Yes," Jules said. Another pause. Then 6 words that landed like thunderwire, reversed under fraud assets, temporarily frozen. Silence stretched across the table. Lysandra's hand darted to her phone, her manicured fingers flying across the screen. Her face drained as quickly as her accounts. "Zeros," she whispered, before fury overtook her composure. Her perfect smile cracked into something raw and ugly. I reached for Jules's hand, gratitude warming my palm. "Thank you," I murmured, though my eyes stayed fixed on my daughter. Naomi's voice cut the air, cool and measured. "This isn't over. They'll strike back harder now." I believed her, and as Lysandra's glare bore into me, I knew the storm was only beginning. The ticket had been sitting on my desk for days, its thin paper a constant reminder of the insult wrapped in formality. One night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and began tracing it. The airline receipt showed it wasn't purchased with Edmund's accounts at all, but through a small travel card tied to an obscure company name, Hale Strategies, LLC. The address was nothing more than a P.O. box in Delaware. Hale Cormac's name, staring at me like a signature of arrogance. I brought the evidence to Naomi the next morning. She studied it, lips pressed thin, and immediately set her paralegal digging deeper. Within a day, they found the corporate shell, no employees, no income, just a vehicle for moving money and buying influence. But it was the surveillance footage that sealed the truth. Naomi obtained it from the cathedral's security office. Cameras mounted high in the arches of the narthex. We watched as Lysandra, draped in black, handed a white envelope to the executor's assistant. She leaned close, her lips moving in careful rehearsal. "Mom, Dad wanted you to rest." The very words whispered into my ear. She had practiced them, scripted them. Naomi's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a mistake. It was theater. A subpoena followed, under oath. The assistant's poise cracked. He admitted Cormac had offered him $50,000 to play his part at the funeral, to read the amended will and deliver the envelope with those rehearsed lines. His voice trembled as he spoke, but the damage was done. Their little performance was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was documented deception. I sat back in Naomi's office, the envelope still in my hands, no longer a symbol of loss, but of evidence. What I had thought was humiliation was now leverage, and with it came the unshakable certainty that the truth was unraveling their show thread by thread. When Naomi called me into her office with Jules already waiting, I knew they had uncovered something important. On the table lay a thick folder stamped with the seal of a Delaware trust company, its edges still stiff from the courier's envelope. Naomi slid it toward me, her eyes steady. "This," she said, "is Edmund's Clause 13 addendum." I unfolded the first page. Edmund's handwriting appeared in the margins, firm and deliberate. He had prepared it years ago, hidden away from the main estate files. Naomi explained that the addendum was designed to activate only under a very specific condition if any heir attempted to manipulate or forge estate documents. The terms were clear. Should fraud be proven, I would receive a lifetime trust, ensuring I could never be forced out of my home or reduced to dependence. My grandchildren, beginning with Theo, would inherit education trusts, locked so tightly that no parent could access the funds for themselves, and anyone found complicit in the fraud would be permanently disinherited. I read the lines twice, the words steadying me like a hand on my shoulder. Edmund had foreseen the possibility, perhaps even feared our daughter's ambition could turn sharp. He had written a safeguard, not just for me, but for the generations beyond. Naomi tapped a paragraph near the end. The funeral ticket, the rehearsed line, the bribed executor, those acts are enough to trigger Clause 13. Jules leaned back, arms crossed, satisfaction glinting in his eyes. They staged their victory, and in doing so, signed their own ruin. The next hearing was scheduled within days. Word of the addendum reached Lysandra and Cormac quickly. Their confident facades fractured when they realized what the ticket scheme had set in motion. I saw the fear flash across my daughter's eyes. But it was Cormac who clenched his fists, already calculating. I knew then they would not surrender quietly. They had too much pride, too much at stake. To accept the defeat Edmund had written into law, Theo came to me one evening. His eyes red-rimmed as though he had wrestled with something far too heavy for 16 years of life. He sat at my kitchen table, pulled out Edmund's old phone, and placed it carefully between us. "Grandma," he whispered, "I didn't know if I should tell you, but I think Grandpa wanted me to." His fingers trembled as he tapped the screen, pulling up a file labeled only with the date. Edmund's voice filled the room, fragile but unmistakable. "Theo, if your mother ever turns greed into her compass, remember, I trust your grandmother to protect you." The rasp in his throat, the pauses for breath, told me it had been recorded in those final hospital days. Tears blurred my vision. Hearing him again was like opening a wound and finding his hand reaching through to steady me. Theo looked stricken, as if he had betrayed his mother by holding this truth. I cupped his cheek and whispered, "You did the right thing," when Naomi played the recording in court. The chamber went still. Judges leaned forward, and even the bailiff's eyes softened. The voice of a dying man, calm and deliberate, carried more weight than stacks of glossy exhibits. Lysandra leapt to her feet, shouting that it was fake, a fabrication. But Theo stood, shoulders squared, and told the court he had heard it himself, had kept it safe, had known in his heart it was real. His courage silenced her protests more than any ruling could. The gavel struck once to quiet the room, but the echo of Edmund's words lingered. They had the power to shift not only the case, but the course of what came next. The courtroom felt colder than any winter wind outside. I sat at the petitioner's table with Naomi and Jules, listening as months of hidden truths unfolded in precise detail, piece by piece. The facade Lysandra and Cormac had built collapsed under the weight of evidence. The notary who had supposedly witnessed Edmund's final will admitted he hadn't been present at all. DocuSign logs showed the signature was uploaded from Cormac's office computer, not the hospital where Edmund had lain fading. Bank records revealed the use of Edmund's expired passport to authorize the transfer. And the executor's assistant, pale and shaken, confirmed the $50,000 bribe he'd accepted to play his part in their scheme. Naomi wove each fact together like threads into a noose, her voice calm but relentless. I kept my hands clasped tightly, willing my breath to remain steady. Across the aisle, Lysandra shifted restlessly, her composure breaking with every new revelation. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was deliberate, unyielding. This court finds clear evidence of manipulation and fraud under Clause 13. The provisions of the contested will are void. Mrs. Honora Vale is confirmed as trustee. Education trusts for the descendants, beginning with Theo Vale, are hereby secured. All legal fees are to be repaid by Ms. Lysandra Vale and Mr. Cormac Hale, who additionally face referral for criminal fraud charges. The gavel struck, and with it, a wave of release washed over me. I had not sought revenge. Only truth and Edmund's voice had been honored. As the courtroom emptied, Lysandra cornered Theo, her eyes blazing. "You've destroyed our family," she hissed. Theo's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "You destroyed it yourself." I felt pride and sorrow mingle as we walked out together. The weight of judgment behind us, but the harder questions still ahead. The sea air in Connecticut has a way of softening everything light. Sound. Even memory. Months have passed since the gavel came down, yet I still wake sometimes expecting Edmund's cough in the hallway or the soft rustle of his paper at dawn. On those mornings, I brew my tea and tend to the roses lined along my windowsill. Each bloom a reminder that life, even after storms, still insists on beauty. Pinned above my desk is the one-way plane ticket, the insult that became my proof. I keep it there not as bitterness, but as testimony paper meant to erase me, instead became the weapon that restored me. Theo spends most weekends here now. He has grown taller, steadier, and when he talks about the Vale Foundation, the scholarships already awarded in Edmund's name, his voice carries a conviction far older than his years. Watching him volunteer, speaking to students who remind him of his grandfather's quiet generosity, I know Edmund's legacy is safe. Jules stops by often, usually with a bottle of wine and that wry smile that says he's still half surprised by how it all unfolded. Naomi, too, has become more than counsel. She is a friend who reminds me that justice is not always cold. It can be tender, measured, and human. One evening, as I watered the roses, I caught my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at me was older. Yes, but not defeated. For so long, I equated love with provision, with money spent, checks written, sacrifices made. But standing in that quiet room, surrounded by friends, family, and the blooms I'd nurtured myself, I whispered the truth aloud. I once thought money was the weight of love. But respect is the air that keeps us alive. If betrayal wore your child's face, would you forgive or finally breathe free?